Okay, so now you've either shot your own reference footage, or you're going to use the reference footage that I provided, or maybe you found some online. The next thing we're going to do is actually get that into Maya, so let's move over to the computer. In this session, I'll be looking at some Maya basics. So we'll be looking at how to move around in the viewport, how to set up a useful window layout, how to create a camera, that kind of thing. We'll also take the reference footage that we shot and we'll attach it to a camera inside of Maya so that we can see it right at the same time as we work. So if you're ready, let's move on to the next session and get all set up ready for animating. So for those of you who are new to the software, Maya opens up basically with nothing there. This is an empty scene. There's lots of options and menus around, but I'll take you through it. And we're only interested in the stuff that we use to animate, so we can pretty much ignore 90% of the stuff that's in here. So this is what you should see when you open Maya up for the first time. This big window is your viewport. This is where you can view your animation. This one that opens it with is the perspective camera. There are also left, right, top cameras, and also cameras that you create yourself, which is what we'll do shortly when we're going to create our shot. So have a little play with moving around the viewport. To do that, you hold down the Alt on Windows or the Option key on a Mac, and left click and drag. That will rotate your view like this. If you Alt or Option and middle mouse drag, that's going to move your view around. And if you Alt or Option and right click, that will zoom in and out. I use a Wacom to navigate and have the middle and right clicks mapped to the buttons on the side of the stylus. So the first thing to do is to create a scene file. We'll use the scene when we start creating our superhero style landing animation. Let's go to File, Save Scene As, and we're going to call our scene 3PL for 3-point landing underscore block, as that's the stage of animation we will be at, and we'll call it 001 001 as its version 11 and just hit Save As. Okay, so the next thing to do is to check that our frame rate is set to 24 frames per second, and we can do that just by looking at the little menu down here, which it is currently set to 24 FPS. If I click the triangle, it will give me lots of other frame rates all the way up to 48,000 FPS. We don't need that, we need 24. We're going to match the same frame rate as film. Okay, so that is done. Next thing, we will set our render globals to a 1080p HD setting. So to do that, I click the little clapperboard with the cog on it, and I scroll down the list down here. Currently it's set to HD 540, but if I just again go to the drop down menu, I change it to HD 1080 and I click close. That will just give us a nice 16:9 ratio when we come to create our camera, which is what we will do now. So to do that, in Maya you can hold down the spacebar and it will bring up this hotbox menu. It's basically all of the menu items that you would find along the top here, but it's just easier to get to. So I will go to Create, Cameras, Camera, and then just let go on there, and it will create a camera for me in the center of the world. It is set to 000. So now we have a camera sitting in our world. A good thing to do is to create a layout that we can use to work with. So I have previously created one here, so you won't have this button here. So what you can do is right click on any of these icons here, and then we're going to look for 3 planes split top, and that gives us 2 viewport windows and a nice big piece at the bottom that we could put our graph editor in. More on the graph editor later, but let's set it up. So currently it's set up quite well. It's got our perspective view in this window. In this panel we want to show our camera view, so we will go to Panels, Perspective, Camera 1. This is showing what our camera is currently seeing. And then at the bottom here we'll have the graph editor, and if it doesn't appear for you, just go to Panels, Panel, Graph Editor. So now we have those panels already set up. I'm just going to adjust what we see in each one just to keep our workflow simplified. So in the perspective view, if you click the show button at the top, you see you've got a lot of checked items here. We're not really interested in any of these, to be honest, for what we're doing in animation. So I'm going to switch it to say show none, and then I'll go back to that and I'll just make it say show polygons and show Neves curves. You'll understand why soon enough, but for now we'll do it early. And same in the camera view, I'll put show none and then show polygons and show image planes, just like this. And now we can save this layout just by right clicking and putting save current layout and then give it a name, so we'll call it anim, press OK. So that should be saved now for you. If you do want to show it, you can right click and it should be listed here. Next thing to do is to add our reference into our camera view. So I'm going to click on this button which will select the camera that this is showing us, and then I'll click on the attribute editor, which is the icon up here. If we scroll down to environment, where I can create an image plane, so I'll click create and it will show me a big yellow cross, which is where the image plane is, but there's no image on there yet. So then I scroll back up in the same attribute editor, I go to image plane, click the little folder, and then we'll go and find the image sequence. So here's my image sequence, frame numbered 000 to 100. So I just click one of those files, I press open, and it will appear in my camera view. I click this checkbox here to say use image sequence, and now you'll see if I scrub on the timeline, there we go, we have reference in our Maya scene. And as we shot it at 24 frames per second and our scene is set to 24 frames per second, it will play at the correct speed. Currently this reference is a bit big, it's going to get in the way, so what I'd like to do is just to make it a bit smaller and tuck it away in a corner. So to do that, if we scroll down in the attribute editor and the size here, if I just change this first text box to 0.5, that's pretty good, it makes it smaller for us so we can still view our animation at the same time. And then I'll just offset it to put it in a corner. If I put minus 0.4 in this box and 0.2 in this box. So the first box is for your X translations, so your left and right. The second box is for your Y translations, which are your up and down. So that will place it in the top left corner for us, which is perfect for what we need. And now it's a case of adjusting our camera to position it in a similar position to the angle of our reference. Now I did turn off the cameras, so I'm just going to turn back on cameras in this view so I can select it. So now we're going to move the camera. If you just click on it, you'll select it. If I press the W key, that will give me the translate tool or the move tool. That will then allow me to just move it around using these arrows. So I'll just pull it away using the X arrow, which is the red one. And then if I press the E key, it will switch on the rotate tool, and I can just grab this yellow line here and just drag it around just to rotate the camera. I'm going to lift it up slightly to match again the position of the, I'm trying to match the floor, the horizon in the reference footage. So I'm just going to move it back, move it over to the left here, and then rotate it back around, something like this. Might need to be a bit higher, and I'm just going to pull it somewhere over here. Okay, let's leave it like that for the moment. We're going to build some geometry that will represent our ground and our ladders. So to do that, I'm going to hit the space bar again to get the menu. I'll go to Create, Polygon Primitives, Plane. That will create a piece of geometry in the center of the world. If I then press the R key, that will swap me to the scale tool. I can then left click on this box in the middle and just drag it, and it's going to grow like this. and then I'm just going to pull it along in the blue or the Z scale and just make it something like this. So it's quite large, it's got a nice big ground for us to land on. And then to create the platform, I will simply hit the spacebar again and go to create polygon primitive cube, and then I've still got my scale tool on, so I'll just scale it up to something like this, and then I'm going to make it wider like so, and taller. You see it scales in both sides, so I'm just going to lift it up a touch and move it back here. So now I've built this, I can then adjust my camera so I've got everything framed. I'll just check the actual framing because the viewport doesn't give us exactly what will be rendered, but if I click this button here with the blue circle in it, it will show me our 1080p framing, so I can make sure it's framed well. Now don't forget, we're going to have a character stood on the top of this, so I need to make sure we can see our character at the top. So I'm just going to lift the camera slightly, maybe just rotate it back around this way. So just, you can do this as long as you need to get the framing you're happy with. Just drop it down and maybe just rotate it back so it looks up a little bit. That's where our character will be. So that looks quite nice. I think I'm happy with that. So we're kind of matching the position of the ladder. So we're really going to be able to use our reference well for this exercise. And in order for us to not be selecting this all the time, I'm just going to select both of them by left click dragging and selecting both. And then I'm going to click this tab here which says channel box, and down at the bottom is a box for display layers. If I click the white plane and blue circle, it will put them both items in a layer. I can then click this a couple of times until it says R, and it means now I can't select this geometry. It just avoids us accidentally selecting it. If I double click the text, I can change that layer to be called set geo for our set geometry, and then we don't have to worry about it. In a similar fashion, let's also lock the camera. Now that we've spent time getting the camera angle correct, we don't want to lose it. And it is super easy to lose the camera view as you're working, as you start rotating around in it, thinking it's the perspective view. So the best thing to do is to lock it. You can always unlock it later if you decide you want to adjust the camera for any reason. So to do this, simply click the camera button here, which will select the camera that we're looking through. And then on the right in the channel box, just highlight the attributes you want to lock. We're going to lock the translate, rotate and scale. Then right click and go to lock selected. You'll see a little grey bar on each of the attributes that are locked. And now if I go into the camera view and try to move around in it, you'll see that it doesn't let me. If I want to undo that, I just click the camera again, select the attributes and unlock selected. And then I can move around in the camera view as much as I like. Top tip, if you do actually move the camera by accident like this and you want to get back to the view you had, you'll find that pressing undo does not work. You have to use the open square brackets button on the keyboard, and that will cycle back through the views that you've had. So before you get into that mess, lock the camera. And lastly, I'll show you how to run a play blast. A play blast is a quick preview video of your animation. We do this so we can view our animation playing back at the correct speed. To check the speed you're getting on your machine, go to Display, Heads Up Display, Frame Rate. Make sure that is checked and you will see the frame rate appear in the bottom right corner of your viewports. If I now click the play button on the lower right of the Maya window, I can see the frame rate I'm getting, and it's well above the 24 frames per second that we need for our scene. So I now know that what I'm viewing is accurate in terms of its playback speed. Once we start getting characters in there and set geo, etc., Maya is going to have trouble keeping up, and so the frame rate will start to drop. When this happens, you have no choice but to run a play blast. To do this, simply right click on the timeline, go to Play Blast and click the little option box on the right of the pop-up window. And then make sure that you have From Render Settings, Scale set to 1 and Remove Temporary Files. It's important to click on the camera view you want to play blast first, so I'll just click in the camera window and then I'll click Play Blast. You'll see the timeline will run through, and once that's done our play blast should appear. So now we can play this and we know it is running at the correct speed of 24 frames per second. So we use these to check our work. We'll be using these a lot more once we get into the animation stages. So that is play blasts. Okay, so let's recap. So now we should be able to open and save a scene, move around in the viewport, set the frame rate, set the render globals, create a camera, create some simple set geo, create a scene layout, apply some reference footage to a camera, lock a camera, position a camera, run a play blast. So we're all set to animate, right? Not quite yet. First we need a character animate, and that's where the character rig comes in. So in the next session, we're going to look at everything to do with character rigs, where to get one, how to bring one into Maya, how to use it. So let's move on.